You are watching original video by Truthdig.com. For more information and resources, visit us on the web at www.truthdig.com.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
So how long have you been out now?
I've been out for 1 month, 31 days, and it's the 6th, so 31 and 6 is 37 days.
Okay. And it's hard to adjust when you've been locked up.
It's different. It's definitely different. But every day you make a little progress. And being when I importuned and begged them to let me come home, it's so convalescent to be among my family, to be among friends. People come to visit. Every little bit heals. And last week, we went to the dinner of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, all my old running buddies from the courts, and they gave me a standing ovation.
Wow.
And that was another piece of the puzzle, my old life coming back. So that was good.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about, because your own career as an activist and as a lawyer, you have witnessed in essence, the death of the legal system, a functioning legal system. The legal system was always biased, especially if you were a person of color, of course, or you espoused politics that the state didn't like. But what we've seen is something, I think, much more traumatic and frightening. And maybe you could go back. I know you defended Sheikh Omar Abdulrahman. You were the lawyer. At what point, if you could trace the deterioration, what you saw happening, whether it predated 9/11, it certainly was accelerated by 9/11.
Right.
How do you see that trajectory?
Well, I think in the 70s, which is when I started practicing, was really the golden era because we had all these wonderful decisions and expected more and more of what would be fair, how to do a lineup, what was the government have to turn over to you as material before a trial, all of those things. And of course all the racial also, the Batson decisions, all of those. And we saw them after the 70s gradually be wormed away and end up as really being empty promises, and more a case of what can the prosecution undermine and get rid of in these very strongly worded and very pro-defending cases. But I think we also saw, and this is the part that really troubles me, a death of the spirit of the bar, that the lawyers that were defending people accused of crime no longer saw it as a calling, something that you did because you were answering a higher voice, that you were, I don't want to make it into any kind of religious thing, it wasn't that, but you defended people because they were up against the mightiest organism in the universe, the governments of the United States, whether they were state or federal. And it was only you against the world when you were in there. And that, I think, is now sadly lacking. I tell you, the stories the women told me at Carswell, women who were so cruelly sold out by the lawyers that represented them.
These were on plea deals then?
Plea deals, and also, it's interesting, class and race all operate just as vibrantly when they're lawyer-client situations. And it's funny, I was talking to my doctor daughter today, and she was also saying in the medical profession as well, people just sit back and let the doctors tell them what they have to do without saying, listen, I'm doing it, but in the medical profession, clearly the male lawyer, the male judge, the authority figures that women are trained, even women who are criminals supposedly, to respect and fear. And most of them, I would say, why didn't you tell the judge this when this was happening? Why didn't you, when you gave a plea, why didn't you say, but judge, I wasn't even there. This is my boyfriend who did this. He's, I said, why didn't you say I want a trial? I want to go to trial. I want to tell. I was afraid. I was afraid.
What do you think? What brought about that change? What forces created that shift that you talked about within the legal profession?
A lot of things. I think one big thing, and I'm not quite sure how to pigeonhole it, but is the fact that law education became so expensive that people had to mortgage their souls in order to go to law school. When I went to law school, I actually went to Rutgers Law School in Newark, while the smoke was still rising from in 1971, and I got a free ride. Which is the vernacular by kids for not having to pay anything, because they were anxious to have a class of more than 50% women to show that this is how it should be, and also because it was a state university and the tuitions were very low anyway. But nowadays it's in the tens of thousands, and I think when people have to mortgage their future life in order to go to get this piece of paper, then they worry so much, and they rightly so, about paying back and getting a job that allows them to pay back and still live. You know, that was not my concern. Maybe it should have been, but I didn't have that concern. I could say I'm going to, when I had applied to various places for jobs, including a couple of DA's offices, which I'm glad I didn't get a job, but I was told you should be a prosecutor. If you're a good prosecutor, then you can be a good defense lawyer. But I'm just as glad I never was. But they said things to me, like I remember Frank Hogan in New York saying to me, "We don't hire women." Just as flat as that, just as out. But, and I could decide. I could say, I'm going to open my own office. I'm going to hang out my shingle, and we'll see what comes through the door. Of course, then, as recently, I had the great support of a wonderful partner.
A former boxer.
The former boxer who likes to hang out in front of the White House and make trouble for them all, hang out in a lot of places and make trouble. But, he was so totally supportive of this effort of mine. He had a motorcycle shop at that point.
Oh, really?
And the motorcycle shop was on the ground floor of this building in Greenwich Village, and mine was on the second floor. And it was very funny. Sometimes the lawyers would go to court and they'd say, but judge, her office is up above a motorcycle shop. Like, they were intimidated by that. But, yes, and so I could start out on my own. I could take whatever cases
What
I
about
wanted.
ideological groups like the Federalist Society, and how much of a role do you think they played in corrupting the legal system?
Well, I had one experience with the Federalist Society at Stanford. I was invited to be the speaker, and when we got to the motel, there was a letter from, I don't know who it was, but saying, we've decided you can't speak.
What year was that?
That was when I was first arrested, so it had to be 92. Pretty sure it was 92, spring of, it could have been 93, but I'm pretty sure it was 92.
And the letter was signed by who?
I think it was signed by one of the deans, or the dean of the law school, or someone of that ilk. And, but I went on the campus anyway, and there was, and I'm sorry I don't remember her name, because she was very, very strong and very helpful, and the kids also, they were adamant that I was going to speak and they were going to sponsor me, and that for this particular thing the dean didn't have the right to say anything about who was going to, this was their show, etc. So I did speak, but the audience was spiked with Federalist juniors, I guess you'd call them. And
what did they do?
Well, they thought they were asking very clever questions. But of course they're asking clever questions to a trained trial attorney who had been in the business at that point for almost 30 years. And so of course I was able to parry with them, and I will say that the audience was so happy that I put them in their place. One of the questions I remember, I had once responded to a New York Times interview by saying that I thought that the, propping up the capitalist system was not a good thing to be doing, and if you were a lawyer, you should think twice before you take a job that does that, and so on and so forth. And of course, someone had to get up and make a big speech about the capitalist system and how it, well, for that, how would any of us got here. And I'm trying to think of my very clever answer, which was something along the line of, well, I sleep I sleep very well at night, and I look in the mirror in the morning, and I'm happy with myself, and I hang on 1 minute. What were you going to say? You remember the punchline?
Yes. Much more comfortable.
But you don't remember
Yes,
it.
I
Now
do.
you interrupted.
That's okay.
But he said he's going to go to work for the federal government.
No, he didn't say that. He said he was going to work for the capitalist system.
Okay, and your answer was there are many people around the world who have been oppressed by the capitalist
No,
system.
that wasn't it. It was
I was
better
your
than that.
favorite aunt. I would tell you.
No, that was part of it.
Okay, if I was your favorite,
I said to him, if I was your favorite aunt, I would just have to say that you're becoming part of a very ugly machine that hurts people, doesn't help them.
List. I'm trying to get the forces that have destroyed the legal system. Money in the law schools. What else?
Okay, I think.
The ideological groups like the Federalist Society. Anything else?
Well, I think that the winds, as they blow, I think the winds of change have really brought us and young law students to a very different place, where they are very interested in making contacts, in hanging out with the other side of schmoozing with the judge, as I say, liking that, siding with the enemy. I mean, for me, it was always, those people. I don't want to have anything to do with them, in the sense of, being. Let's go out and have a drink together. These were not my people, and but that changed. It really changed.
When did you see that change?
I would have to say mid '80s. Sort of at the same time that during the '80s, the federal government was. Mopping up. They were arresting all sorts of people who had been underground for many years and putting them on trial for old crimes and new crimes, and certainly by the end of the 80s that was over. There were a few isolated cases of people that were still out there, but it wasn't like they were going to get a whole network. But after that was over, I just had the sense that the lawyers were no longer part of the game, I guess you'd say. It was the government versus us.
Maybe there's another less high-profile case that I won't ask about that was important, but I want to talk about Omar Abdul-Rahman.
Yes.
Predates 9/11.
Indeed.
From everything I've seen about the case, it was completely bogus.
Yes.
Basically they arrested him for his political viewpoint. Would that be correct?
Well, I think it went a little deeper than that, Chris. It was his political viewpoint, but it was more his ability to lead the masses of Egypt in a counterattack on Hosni Mubarak, whom he made no bones about despising and calling out and being very forthwith about that. He was accused of being part of the group that assassinated Sadat and went to trial and won, defending himself, and then was placed for some bogus reason on house arrest, and then in which I don't want to go into because I'm not really sure what the answer is, but managed to get a visa to come here as a religious person and did come here. So he was really the opposition and a leader of the opposition, and I think he was considered very dangerous by the United States government and mostly by the Egyptian government, and this was really a plan to take him off the scene, to get him put away where he would no longer exert the influence he had. So because he had a large following here, and he was, I will say this, he was a very dynamic man. I mean, I don't speak any Arabic, But you recognize it when you see it. You know this is someone who means something.
Was that trial, I mean, maybe at that point you understood the system so well, or did that trial sort of jolt you and shock you, perhaps?
I'll tell you, I always say to people, the only time I ever cried in a courtroom was when the judge, who later became Attorney General of the United States, Mukasey, we had formulated an entire defense based on the notion that the government's theory of what a sheikh or an emir does is erroneous, and what they do is really rather benign, and they give advice, but they're not out there burying the AK-47s under the palm trees. And we had enlisted numerous experts to come in and talk about what is jihad, how do, all of the keywords the government loves. And actually the judge had approved all of these expenses for this one guy who was Dutch and was the jihad master. For Jim Asbarisk was going to come in, the ex-senator, I think the only Muslim senator. I don't know whether he was Muslim or whether he was just Middle Eastern, but at any rate, he was going to talk about how Muslims felt that they were being hunted at all times and they maintained low profiles. It wasn't from guilt, it was from the reality of the government. Anyway, when the time came to present the defense, the judge very, very differently said, well, I want to hear what everyone's projecting as a defense, because it's silly to go all through it and then have me disallow it. So everybody had to get up and give him a preview. And when we got up and gave our preview, and this witness for this and this witness, he said, no, I'm not allowing any of the ones that have to do with what is Islam, what is jihad, he says, it will only confuse the jury. Well, I just couldn't, we argued, and I just bursted. I couldn't believe he would take away our entire defense, and that's what it really amounted to. So the jury never got to hear anything but the government version of who the sheikh was and how this had operated.
Was that a kind of seminal moment in terms of, at what point did you realize, or maybe it was then, maybe it was later, that it was kind of over, that the legal system was beyond salvaging?
No, I had my doubts long before that. Long before that, yes, because my practice was largely young men and a few women from the forgotten places, as you have so eloquently talked about them, the throwaway places, the throwaway kids.
Right.
And I knew the system totally failed them from beginning to end. From the moment they were born, schools, I had taught for many years, I knew the schools were hopeless. Then they get to be...
You were a school teacher before you were a lawyer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How many years?
10 years. I was a librarian, yes.
Were you?
I was the school librarian.
Oh,
I
that's
told
so cool.
stories, yes. Wow. And then I got in front of juries, and some told more stories, but just elucidated the facts as they should have been. But I knew that, that the system... I was a dyed-in-the-wool by the time I got out of the 60s. Oh, definitely. I mean, we did Vietnam. My husband and I were both, we always laugh and say, for the first 20 years of our relationship, I was Ralph's old lady. He led the community control of schools struggle here in New York, and ended up getting arrested for knocking down a few brawly NYPD, and went to jail, and of course they yanked his license at that point. They couldn't teach anymore. But we had lost the community control struggle, and I said, if I stay in the schools, I'm going to be some kind of a shopping bag lady. So he said, well, what do you want to do? At this point, I always tell the story, we had 2 kids, I had 2 kids, he had 4 kids by a prior marriage, and we had 1 on the way. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I always wanted to go to law school. So did he say, no, keep teaching, we really need the money, we really got all these expenses? No, he said, I guess you better do it.
Wow.
Yes, so, that kind of partner is really fabulous.
So tell me about when was there a certain moment when you lost hope in the judicial system?
Well, see, I always believed, Chris, that I could do it. It's like, you're the last man. You're like the kicker after they're running the ball back, and you're the only one between the goalpost and everything. But I was there. They had to get by me. If they couldn't get by me, then they couldn't win. I have enough ego and belief in myself to say, I didn't believe they could do that every time, that I could win, that I could make a difference. And I think I did make a difference for a lot of people. Even the people who got convicted were still very, very, and jail, what it does, it corrodes you and corrupts. And of course, the first thing to toss into the garbage is the lawyer. The lawyer did it to me, but... Right. I had an occasion to go to Sing Sing many years after when I was a very successful lawyer at that point, and people I had defended way back when, who got sentenced not to lifetime, they were so happy to see me and they were embracive, and I said, you see, that's what's totally lost. There's no sense on the part of the client that lawyer is his champion. I made a speech for Ralph read it for the National Lawyers Guild.
I read it.
Yeah,
did a good job, Ralph.
That old theory that
it was a beautiful speech.
That champion is great.
But still, with the Omar Abdul Rahman trial, you were surprised.
Yes.
I mean, that was maybe a step towards shutting the door completely.
Completely. I got into the case because I was doing so many buy and busts, etc., that I needed something new to look at. Mm-hmm. I had almost gotten into the original World Trade Center bombing through one of the people who was convicted, and the Judge Duffy, who was never my friend, he made sure I didn't get in. He refused to. He refused to pay for expert advice, which was sorely needed. Of course, the lawyer that replaced me never even asked for the expert. That's another story for another day. But at any rate, I felt that the Muslims were the new, if you excuse the use of the N-word, that was how Americans were looking at Muslims, and that they were targets of the government, even back in '95. And certainly this outspoken man who was, what was he? He was the poster child of people still say, who, was convicted of bombing the World Trade Center, in which he never was never even indicted for it. It was an unindicted act. It was an indicted act of the conspiracy that he was ultimately convicted. But there was no findings of who was involved and who wasn't. I really believe he was never involved in that, and he was certainly never involved in this conspiracy to blow up landmarks. Although he said some unfortunate things, which, because we weren't able to present how that would come about, the jury never had any understanding that this was daily routine for a person of his stature. Right. People come with questions, they answer the questions. But at any rate,
you see the deterioration within the legal system. 9/11 appears. Is the legal system at that point utterly dysfunctional, or does 9/11 finish it, or follow a little bit the process?
Well, I would say that it was not entirely dysfunctional at that point. I mean, you were still
before 9/11.
Yeah, you were still, as I said, able to go in and one-on-one try the case, talk to the jury directly, be able to convince them of common sense and what was going on here. But after 9/11, when the playing field suddenly changed, and it was everything favored the prosecution, certainly in federal cases. I mean, there was no level playing field anymore. It was like if you were the last guy standing and you had to keep them from making the goal, you were at the 6-inch line trying to do it, because that was impossible.
Right.
To stop them. They controlled They controlled what the charges were. They controlled, whether an adjournment would be given. They determined, whether the cooperation is worthy and everybody must cooperate. And, it changed into a very different system, certainly on the federal level.
And these were all from basically a raft of legislation were passed immediately after 9/11.
The wish book, I always called it.
Oh.
That, what was it, a 400-page document that the Congress admitted none of them ever read it. They just passed it.
And that kind of irrevocably
Altered.
it was finished then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Along with the war on drugs, along with all these other catchphrases, that they use to justify what they're doing. In other words, when you send a mother with 3 kids to jail for 30 years,
Right. Now, when Hannah Arendt writes Origins of Totalitarianism, she said that what was the kind of foundational element for fascism were the stateless. People like her who had to flee to France had no documents and she said they created for the stateless omnipotent police forces that could do anything they want. In the same way that we have created omnipotent police forces in marginal communities for people of color. They can stop you on any pretext. They can kick down your door. They stack ridiculous amounts of charges onto you to force you to plea out because you only got 10 minutes with your lawyer. To what extent did that war on drugs and the creation of these omnipotent police forces then become magnified, especially after 9/11, throughout the wider society?
Well, I think that the glorification and fear, which was instilled in all of us by the circumstances of 9/11 and by a government that was only too happy to instill that fear as a way of bending the will of the people. I'll never forget, my son-in-law is blonde and blue-eyed, and his mother was saying at one family gathering, well, I don't mind, they can search me at the airport for all they want. If it means we prevent this happening or somebody getting killed, I'm happy to be searched. And he said to her, he's married to our interracial daughter, and he said, that's fine for you, Mom, but my wife is stopped every time. She is stopped endlessly because she fits the profile. She has a name. My daughter's name is Zenobia, so she's got a name that is instantly suspicious. All of the little, what would you call them, the things that twig law enforcement to look twice at someone and harass them. Right. I mean, we have spent a lifetime, Ralph and I, being stopped by the police. I mean, even now that he's 79 and I'm 74, they'll roll up on us because we're an interracial couple, per se, suspect. Yeah. And it's quite amazing. And I think that's what took over in the United States, that willingness to just say, listen, I'll do anything so I never have to look at my television with that building falling down again. Even though without wanting to understand, and I'm along with Susan Sontag when saying, we've never explored why. Well, why did this happen? What compelled 21 young men to give up their lives to do this thing? No, we don't want to look at that. We don't want to know why.
What is the difference between our legal system and the legal system of a classical totalitarian society, communist, fascist, at this point?
Well, I think that we continue the facade that we are fair, that we have this constitution we respect and we can rely on, and that we can raise, you can't do that, that's my constitutional rights, etc. When really they're puff of smoke, they don't really exist. What would I say? My husband likes to say they don't put any smoke on it anymore, but the fact of the matter is they don't need to. They just, it continues, it's sort of self-perpetuating fairy tale that people buy into. But truly, of course, I've thought about it a lot, and I thought about, because because I was a great admirer of certain other governmental systems, particularly the Chinese in the early days, and of course Cuba and Vietnam. And I have always said I like the accusatorial system as such, where the government has to prove you guilty.
Right.
You don't have to prove yourself innocent, because I think that puts such an impossible burden on a human being. And I like that they have a burden to do that. They're the government. They got all the resources, whatever, they're Chinese or Cuban or whatever. But we're not seeing a whole, and it certainly doesn't exist in this country anymore either. So, kind of a thing of the past.
So after 9/11, you're still practicing law.
Mm-hmm.
What's changed for you in the courtroom?
No, that's, I can't, I could plead chemo brain that I really don't remember. I'm trying to really cull my brain here.
I mean, are you running into impediments that were not there before?
Yes, for example, I mean, even in my own case, when I got arrested and the hue and cry was raised that they were listening in on my...
And let me just back up and correct me, but basically you were arrested for passing a message from Obda ar-Rahman to Reuters.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. Well, it wasn't a message. It was a outright press release.
Press release.
It was saying, this is my view of this, which was had to do with a ceasefire that his group had entered into a couple of years earlier. And but yes, it was a written statement, right. And I lost my train of thought here, but anyway.
Well, we were talking about your own trial.
Oh yes, one of the things that just outraged people was that this was before 9/11, but they still listened in on all the conversations with him, which were attorney-client. We thought was privileged.
How did you find that out? When during the trial they produced the transcripts?
Yeah, well, earlier they said that they had listened in, and we got all the and we got the silliest thing. They did it through a hole in the ceiling, so you would hear talking, and you would see our hands and drinking a soda.
Oh, they were filming. They were filming it.
They were filming it from the top down, but you couldn't see anything.
Was this at the MC? Where was it?
No, it was at a jail in Rochester, Minnesota.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he was in the medical facility. But that was everybody was so outraged when they heard about that. But under the new rules of the what is it called, the law that was passed after 9/11,
Patriot Act.
Patriot Act, that was no longer a problem.
But when they did it, the Patriot Act hadn't been passed.
No, it hadn't been.
So it was technically illegal.
Technically, but the judge found that it wasn't a constitutional right. You see, it's not embedded in the Constitution. The privilege is just honored by custom and usage. Not, there's nothing more slippery than a judge who wants to get to the determination he wants to get to. So that was never, and then he pointed out, of course, that under the Patriot Act, this would be now perfectly all right.
In your own trial, your own trial is kind of a watershed in this sense that it completely illustrates the breakdown at this point of a functioning legal system. Wouldn't you say? I
would say so. Yes.
And what year was that?
The trial actually, we were arrested in '92 in the spring. About 6 months after 9/11,
right.
And then the trial was
even though for all of this activity was predated 9/11. What year were they arresting you for activity for? What year?
90. 90. Yeah, 90.
Okay.
90. And the it also was a trying to think, there was another thing I was going to say about it, but anyway.
So
it was 90 when you were arrested.
Right.
90, yes.
I was not arrested in 90. I was arrested in 90. If 9/11 is 91, right?
Right.
So I was arrested in the spring of 92.
So when you were arrested, it's such an egregious violation, were you worried, or did you think this is ridiculous? What did you?
Well, the famous story, which I have, I guess, stump speeched on all the many years, was, we were living in a different house then. It had a stoop, which in New York is where you go to sit on the steps in the summertime when you can't afford to go to East Hampton. But at any rate, we were getting ready to go to court. We were rushing around. I was still upstairs. Ralph was out on the stoop. And I hear him talking. And I'm saying, what is he? And then I hear the dog barking, our dog barking. And I go to the door and I hear him saying, I don't see any badge. I don't see any warrant. What are you doing here anyway? And so I come around the door. And the guy looks and says, and he was clearly cop, the cheap shoes, and he says, we're not here for you, we're here for her, pointing to me. Before that, I had said, the best part of the story I ruined just a minute ago, but when I came around the door, I said, Ralph, take it easy, take it easy. We'll have you out by lunchtime. I thought it was he's the guy that goes and gets arrested at a PTA meeting. I thought it was one of his old warrants jumping up or something. And then they say, we're not here for him, we're here for you. Well, I was flabbergasted. I could not, I know it wasn't for forgetting to sign my income tax return. They don't send a squad out, with all those cars. So, but I knew better than to start asking them about it, because that comes back, and then suddenly you're shown to be less than forthcoming if you're asking questions about something you should have known about, or whatever way the government wants to twist it. So I did remain silent, and I really didn't find out what the whole thing was about, or even who was arrested with me until that afternoon when we were allowed to meet with lawyers and shown the indictment and told what was going on.
Did you think that you would get off in court?
I did. I definitely did. I thought that
what was the official charge they leveled against you for?
Well, the most important was materially aiding a terrorist organization, and their theory was that the aid was providing my client's voice to the world through that press release.
Wow.
The judge dismissed it the first time around.
I know, before.
Yeah, before.
And then Cheney, I think, said, no, we're going to do this again,
right? Right, I believe so. I never got the exact personnel, but I think that would probably sounds right.
The man without a heart.
Yes.
I guess he has someone else's heart now.
Yeah, or something akin to a heart, or.
And at what point did you realize, I'm getting lynched?
The rulings during the course of the trial, some of them were so bizarre, and when they put up on the screen, my co-defendant had some tapes.
These were your, paralegals, right?
One was a paralegal, and the other was the interpreter.
Right.
When they had found some books and tapes and things in his basement where he had stored them, and among them was some kind of conference being held in the Middle East where bin Laden was present, and it was a Free the Sheikh conference, typical,
right.
Not unlike many conferences we have here for many prisoners.
Right.
And but they took that picture of bin Laden and enlarged it to fill an entire screen that had to be 10 feet by 12 feet, huge, which they unrolled in front of the jury. And this was after the judge had assured the jury the case had nothing to do with 9/11.
These were the prosecutors.
Yeah.
So how did they justify that?
Well, they said that it wasn't introduced for the truth of the matter. It was only introduced for the state of mind of my co-defendant. And they gave that instruction 750 times during the course of the trial. That didn't have anything to do with me.
So did you realize very early on
well, not very early on. It took a while. The trial took a while.
Right.
You know, it started in, May, June 2004 and went on until February 2005. But I realized that we were getting a hosing by these guys. There's no question about that.
At what point did you think that you would have to serve prison time?
After that conviction, when I was
Oh, really?
convicted.
Not till then?
Yeah, no, I didn't. And I still had hope for the jury. You know, I'm an old campaigner. You always think the jury's going to pull this out. You're going to convince them, and that we're going to go. But not so.
And you were sentenced to, what was your sentence? 3 years, was it?
No, 2.5.
2.5.
28 months.
Okay. And of which you served how much?
I didn't serve anything. I was the judge let me stay out pending appeal, and so I was out, and the appeals were presented, and it was not until after the appeal with that rip-snorting, right-wing bull of an idiot who apparently likes to who has a penchant for, not a penchant, but he was found to have hit a state trooper up in Connecticut and never stopped, and then had to be brought to, they went and talked to him, and apparently, but at any rate, that was the judge who wrote and said she didn't get enough time. He tried to convince, as we understand it, he had a real campaign with the other two judges to try to get them to say that the sentencing was not legal, which would have left the door open for the judge to basically do anything he wanted to do, but they would not be convinced of that. So basically, he just said that he didn't consider certain things. It has the same effect, probably, but, and it was sent back to the same judge who, of course, in true American fashion, at that point, I don't know, I shouldn't be so blithe about it, since he's very quickly signed my release papers to get me out of jail once he knew I was cancer and all this, and would have done it a lot earlier if the government had given the papers a lot earlier. But he did quadruple the sentence to 10 years.
It was a 10-year sentence.
10-year sentence.
Right,
And he and they also ordered that I go in immediately. I had surgery pending. I was supposed to go, and that they wouldn't hear that. They just said, go in. So I did.
Now, you worked with many clients who went to prison.
Yes.
Now you're in prison. What did you learn about prison, even with all of your knowledge? Once you're in prison, what did you learn about prison that you didn't know before?
I don't think I ever appreciated the unrelenting stress of the place, that you're always waiting for something to come down, that there's such arbitrary authority. Guard A says go down those stairs, use the stairs. Guard B says you can't use the stairs, you're not permitted on the stairs. And you say, but Guard A just said, I don't care what he said, this is my rule. That kind of arbitrary thing, you're always guessing. What does this guy, what does this woman want me to do? Where am I? Where is this? You know, and that's 24, that's all the time. Well, not when you're sleeping, obviously, but you're always on that cusp of doing the wrong thing or getting in trouble for something you never. I mean, I wrote a letter for a woman, and in order to make a copy, I emailed it to Ralph so I could get into that part of the very, very limited computer that we had to make a copy for her. It was basically asking a judge to stay any decision because they were going to take all of her pension as a payment for what she had done. And she wanted to get this letter in right away, so I've emailed it to him, and for that I lost, I think, about 3 months of commissary and email, all the good things.
Where were you at this point?
I was at Carswell.
Which is in Texas, right?
Which is in Texas, yeah.
What else did you learn about being in prison?
Well, I learned that it's almost impossible to organize prisoners in this day and age to stand up, to become a unit, to say no to certain things. I had thought it was be like the old days that where we considered the prisons one of the great resources to recruit people for the political things ahead. But I found it virtually impossible to convince the women at Carswell that they should not be always thinking that what happened to them was personal. They should be looking at political answers, that where they ended up was not because of some personal lack or weakness, but because the political system had designated them to be there as one of the kick-arounds, as one of the not for consumption.
Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure. It's a very interesting question. Not one I think that people. I have to say I think the television has a lot to do with it, because it gives a certain idealized life. People that are in trouble get there because they've done it to themselves, and then they fight and they are able to get out of it, or they get some help from someone and they're able. But I really don't know. I think for many of the women in there, they have no self-esteem at all. They don't think in terms of that this was something that was put on me, not something that. They can think about it in a limited way. In other words, if it's the boyfriend who said, carry this package to Joe's house, and they are therefore placed in a big conspiracy, they understand that much. But, they'll see that only in terms of, and why would they put me in jail for all this time? All I did was carry a package, that kind of thing. Rather than say, I realized, that this was what they had in store for me, and I'm going to fight it. They did a lot of women do a lot of pro bono work. It used to kill me. There was a lot of exploitation by people who held themselves out as
You mean within the prison?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
There were women who held themselves out as being knowledgeable in the law.
I see.
And they weren't.
I see.
But because hope is what you're really selling. You're selling that, and I worked with people. I never asked for anything in return. Although as I said, these others would sometimes get money, put in their commissary accounts for the work they did, and etc. But as I have said many times since I've been home, this is the one real shadow on my tremendous joy at being home. Is that the women I've left behind that I can no longer even communicate with, because the conditions of my probation are that I may not associate with any felons. So I can't even write, Dear Mara, what happened with your case involving someone who got 20 years because she sold some heroin, and then a guy died a week later, and they used that murder to enhance her sentence, completely contrary to everything we ever learned about.
What was, for you, the most sort of heartbreaking thing about being in prison? What was it that, for you, within prison, kind of ripped your heart out?
Well, I think it was this women, at various junctures, but, particularly at mail call, for some reason. They would deliver the mail, they would call out the names, people would get letters. I got a lot of mail. People always, kind of funny, wanted to know, how come you get so much mail? Is that your church? Is that your family? I'd say no. I said, that's 74 years of living a life that makes people respect and love you. And I said, I'm very fortunate in that. And they would look at me sort of disbelieving. But the women who never got a letter, who sat there and day and waited for their name to be called, and it never happened. And people who never got a visit, who are in there, and you see them become more and more institutionalized. By that I mean the world of the prison is the only world. There is no, the outside world does not exist for them any longer. Yeah. And I know even for myself, the visits that I got, they bring you back to reality. We never saw children, for example. Right. The only way you would see children is to go to the visiting room, and the people's kids visiting, you would see them then. But,
and how many of these people were mothers?
Oh, I would say vast majority, almost all. But living a little far away, the expenditure of making a visit is enormous. The problems attendant to getting in, getting out, you couldn't wear underwire bras. You had to do exactly what the guards told you to do. So visits were a difficulty, but more than the visits was the people who never ever got them. And that's one of my semi-quarrels with, what is it, Orange is the New Black, that they sort of gloss over that there is real tragedy in these prisons. It's not just superficial what would I say, soap opera variety. Right. It's real tragedy.
So, to quote Lenin, where do we go?
We're in trouble now.
Where do we go from here? I mean, what do we do for those of us who want an open society, for those of us who want to defeat corporate capitalism? Yeah. We can't go to the courts. Where do we go?
Well, what I'm happiest about my getting out, and I have to say it's the happiest part of it, is that we were able to organize so many people, and we organized them not around, we're this organization and we're supporting her, and then the other organization, well, we can't. If you're supporting her, then we can't. If you're, everybody had to come in on it. There was no way, we didn't let anybody slide and say that they weren't going to support. Everybody was invited. Bring your own banner, whatever it says, but support Lynne. And that's really the most uplifting part. The numbers of just everyday people, the fact that people were moved by the situation. And as I say, I mean, you couldn't have scripted it better, maybe. Here's this champion of the people who loves her work, who loved the people she defended, who ends up in jail, and cancer comes back to claim her, and all she wants is to go home to be with her family, and they're blocking that, and so on and so forth. But so I mean, it was scripted for whatever, even though it was totally real life. It was really happening, and. But I still have faith in the power of the people. Look at this. I don't believe it was our brilliant arguments or that my lawyers, had...
It was Ralph.
It was Ralph who wouldn't let anybody rest. Yes, that's right. But it was other people, too, all over the country, all over the world. Yeah. People that were not there seeing Ralph, but who just were moved by the situation, or because... person A got an email from her old college friend, and this email said, I've become very involved in this campaign to bring Lynne Stewart home. Do you know anything about it? I'm going to send you some stuff via email. And then that person would then go to 10 more. I mean, it's organizing in the new-fashioned, old-fashioned way.
What about, at this point, somebody going into the law? Is it hopeless? I mean, what would you tell a young law student who actually wanted to do the kind of work?
I got a lot of letters. A lot of letters said, Lynne Stewart, I want to be a lawyer just like you were. And I always wrote back and I said, if you have the fire within, the fire in your belly to do the work, and really want to do the work, and it's not always easy, you really pitting yourself against the greatest, the most powerful. But if it's what you really want to do, then do it. Do it. Don't turn your back on it. Don't say it can't be done. It can be done. And as I said, maybe it only can be done at this stage of the game. I mean, I have a son that I'm living with here that is a full-time practicing criminal defense lawyer. And one of the nicest things about living here is, he'll come in and tell about his day and what kind of case he was doing, and it's sort of a nice deja vu moment. But I do encourage people who want to be lawyers, and especially if they write me these heartrending letters saying, I want to be just like you. That was the other story we told about how we were riding in someplace in New York traffic, and the bicycle messenger rode by and tapped on my window and said, you the lawyer. And this nice young woman from San Diego wrote, and she said, that story changed my life. She said, because I want to be the lawyer.
Wow. This was recently?
Recently, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, just to conclude, you probably would be comfortable defining yourself as a rebel. What does it mean to be a rebel?
Well, I have a little quibble, because of course I love words, and rebels to me invoke guys in gray uniforms, which I don't like. But at any rate, I do like them in the Irish sense, which was always used by a certain group that I represented. They always were, their parting with each other always was up the rebels. And it basically means to take everything, to look at everything with a grain of salt, to say, I don't accept anything at face value. I'm not going to become a yes person for this government or this corporation-driven society or this, bling society that loves all its baubles and cars and everything else. I want to be the person who says it's not that way, but I want to be able to say it in a way that people understand it, not where I'm high and mighty, and I don't subscribe, and a lot of people they know it, but it's not widely spread. I'm not waiting for the working class to make the revolution. I think that's a day long gone by. That might have happened in the 30s, and it didn't. We have to look at a new way, some new force, and to me, it's only there is a certain level of disgruntlement, of disillusion among the people.
Yeah.
They're not a happy bunch, but they're not unhappy enough to do anything about it yet. So whatever I can do to be a catalyst for that, I will certainly, that's the rebel's job, I think. But I also, Rosa Luxemburg always said, and we've talked Lenin, now we'll talk Luxemburg, okay. She always said, you had to alleviate human misery along with doing your political work. And certainly for me, human misery is the political prisoners. These 150 so men, mainly men, who were jailed back in the Black Panther, right. Black Liberation Army days, who are still in prison doing outlandish 30, 40, 50 years, basically because they can't ever get past a parole board, they can never get clemency, because the police powers, as we talked about earlier, are so powerful. Especially there are certain places, pockets, the New Jersey State Police being one of them, and so one of the most touching letters I ever received, and I received it before I went to jail, was from Mutulu Shakur, who was convicted along with a group of others involved in the Brinks case in New York, and he said, the absolute faith that the political prisoners have that you, the political people, will someday get us out of jail. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't see a whole lot of movement on that front. I don't see much happening to justify that faith. But I'm going to work at it as much as I can. That's one of my goals. My other goal is not to turn my back on the women in prison, who I think are a very special category and are virtually, they have hairdressing classes and they have some education classes, but they're certainly not real education as we know it. There's so little opportunity to get a degree or do anything else. It's sad. But at any rate, I want to do both of those things connected to prisoners as my down front work, and my Other work is just to be a voice, be one of the voices that speaks up whenever things happen that we know have to be made clear and cogent, and somebody has to say, hold it, no, 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 no.
And you are disbarred,
Yes.
so you cannot practice law.
Can't even work in a law office.
You can't.
No.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what
I
about?
miss it so terribly.
Do you?
I can't tell. Yes. Awful.
Mm.
I liked it. I liked the work.
Well, you were damn good at it.
Yeah. So they tell me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
What should attorneys do in the face of such severe repression, especially if they're progressive-minded attorneys?
Fight like hell. Within the limits, whatever it is. We'll fight like hell outside the limits, as they accused me of doing. But fight, fight, fight. Never give up. There's always a struggle. There's always something to be gained.
And this is from Heidi Bogosian of the National Lawyers Guild. What advice would you give to activists in the current political climate who may be intimidated by government anti-terrorist rhetoric?
Someone out in Seattle asked me that question before I went to jail, and I said to her, the most important thing is don't let yourself get isolated. Don't feel that you're the only one in the world that thinks this way and you must be crazy or something and they're going to get you because you're the only one. Find the other people who think like you. They're out there. There are people out there. There are groups. There's everyone from the raging grannies right up to, the very serious lefties. But there is somebody out there. Make sure you're not all alone. That's the worst part of what we face these days. And as long as you're with other people, you have a fighting chance and you can organize more people. And then that's the old Marge Piercy poem, about if there's 2 of us, we can do this. If there's 4 of us, we can do this. And as it progresses in the poem, if we have 100, we can change the world.
Let's hope. And finally, Lynne, I'll never forget reading what you said about prison being such a loveless and frightening place. Isn't that so much of what's wrong with this system we live in that we're trying to change?
Well, prison is the microcosm. Dostoevsky said it. It is what the society is that builds it and puts people in there, and this is a pretty loveless world we live in. There's we have lots of romantic love, we have lots of Sex in the City, but real love that is the kind that, saves people and makes the world better and makes you go to bed with a smile on your face, that love is lacking greatly. You have to search for that.
We'll never give up.
Never give up.
We love
Never
you.
give up.
This video program was brought to you by Truthdig.com. For more information and resources, visit us on the web at www.truthdig.com.